Hey, all right, good day, folks. Thanks for coming to Finding Warmth of Our Sun. I'm Matthew Brown, your host here at Madison365. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and all that jazz. Please hit subscribe and share. So I'm going to make it a little bit pretty actually quick this week. I just moved, so I haven't had time to pull everything together as I hoped for this week. But I wanted to, I guess, keep it going on some of the police reform stuff, or at least police and policing things, particularly in light that the Common Council just accepted the body cam report, which had issues in itself, and I think the conclusion of the report contradicted its claim. It's really claims based upon the evidence. It suggested that Madison should pilot body cameras, even though it noted that the data on the effectiveness of reducing force and other things within body cameras as far as holding police accountable is mixed at best. Well, there's also quite a lot of data on body cameras that suggest they do nothing. Well, not that they do nothing, but that they primarily increase charges and convictions for minor crimes, particularly targeting lower income and people of color. There's privacy concerns. They're expensive to maintain, train. It's another piece of equipment. When the biggest obstacle isn't necessarily footage, but accountability and police policy and procedure. So it becomes this thing that gets put out front as another piece of equipment, another piece of training, while not addressing a lot of the underlying concerns of more mainstream police reform advocates particularly when it comes to accountability, and not just accountability, but also transparency on police themselves. Body cameras don't necessarily solve these transparency issues, particularly when it, again, comes to internal accountability or somebody violating a procedure and facing consequences, or when it comes to a civilian looking to place a complaint against an officer and hold an officer accountable. Body cameras, aren't completely useless in those things at all. It's inconclusive how valuable they actually are in those things. And one of the biggest things is also there's a psychological aspect to it. And that when we look at body camera footage, we end up taking a first person view, and our brain shifts and a lot of times seeing things that aren't there, where if we saw a third perspective, right, a third party perspective instead of, first, we'd view the situation differently. There's times when things can look much more aggressive, much more violent than they actually are when you pull back. And they might not seem violent at all. And it really skews our perception. Our brain's really an interesting thing in how it processes and sees information. It's not nearly as great as we like to think it is, but I digress. So it's one of these things, though, that gets pushed in police reform. It's another tool that doesn't meet expectations, doesn't meet the cost-benefit analysis. But this is the thing. Reform has been trying to happen since the 1920s. The Minneapolis Police Department has been trying to reform itself since the 1920s. Same with other police departments, right? Particularly around reducing use of force and the exact same things that we're talking about today. So it's a hard thing. And there's, I think, a lot that police reformers, particularly mainstream police reformers, miss, or at least undervalue in their analysis of police reform. One, such as I think another good example is how Governor Evers just signed a bill making chokeholds illegal. Well, the chokeholds that killed Eric Garner, that the police officer that used on Eric Garner, that he was murdered with, was, well, illegal in New York. I mean, and the most that can happen there isn't a criminal charge, but a violation of policy and procedure. This is part of the problem of the use of force spectrum, is that if we don't raise the standard of use of force, all a police officer has to really do is say they were scared for themselves, and scared for their life or the life of others, and boom, they get away with it. And even this bill doesn't get around that, because it allows officers of imminent risk or risk for their life to use a chokehold or use the kneel. So it doesn't do anything. It does nothing. It's useless because of accountability. But that's not the only thing that's going on. New York, it's a culture problem. It's an institutional problem. It's a criminal justice problem of our justice system, and how these things and where these things are rooted and how they were built with intention to be discriminatory, with the mentality in seeing black and brown people lesser than, with the mentality of a battle line, with this thin blue line mentality that a lot of them hold, most of them hold, of this the thin blue line between chaos and order. One, order is a fascistic mentality. In a lot of ways, not saying, being an anarchist or chaos. It's not just chaos and order, but the mentality of keeping order is an unjust mentality more often than not, because it prioritizes order over justice and humanity. So there's this mentality. There's a militarization. Again, the roots in slavery and slave catchers. Intense racism, strong connections to white supremacist organizations such as the KKK and others. Intentional infiltration by white supremacists. Unjust laws. Racially and economically unjust laws that they are here to enforce. Here to protect property over people. The core aspect of American law enforcement is unjust. The very core aspects of it. So we could say we need to protect laws. Well, what laws? People need resources more than they need anything. The safest communities don't have more police officers. They have more resources. And the biggest criminals aren't the ones being prosecuted to target. I mean, that the IRS goes after poor people, not rich people. Police officers don't really target poor people or rich people. Most white-collar crimes, such as wage theft, isn't punishable by a criminal offense. It's a fine. Some of the biggest crimes against humanity aren't actually crimes. So it becomes a way of policing effectively poor people and people of color and our marginalized folks. That's what it does. That's the function of police in our society. And we have to think through, most crimes go unreported. Most reported crimes go unsolved. Most things that police respond to, like 90% of them, aren't even crimes. Like 1% of the things they respond to are violent crimes. So they say we need these massive forces for the 1% of the just in case. When most things they do aren't actually even in response to crime, let alone violent crime. It's a failure of imagination. It's a failure of being able to break through cognitive dissonance. Police don't work, at least the way that we think they do. Or I should say marginally. There's a very marginal impact percentage. You're talking, again, the teens of police reduction in crime, but it's at a massive, massive cost. When things like violence interruption coalitions and like Cities United and these are far more effective at minuscule the cost of police. We keep trying this thing over and over and over and over again, and it's not working. It's just not working. But people have a hard time thinking, well, what comes next? Well, there's a lot of ways to go about this. 'Cause there does have to be a way to uphold the social order and the social fabric. Some of it, some of it isn't even on police per se, but they are a lot of times the gatekeepers. And if they get behind some of these things, a lot can change, such as they refuse to enforce unjust laws. But they don't. They don't. They don't. So we're in this cycle, and a lot of times they rebel. It's again, wanting to get into this deeper and wanting to make this quick as we continue in this and trying to think through this mentality that we have to have police the way that we have them, that we shouldn't wipe the slate clean and reimagine public safety, decouple a lot of things from police and invest in humanity and invest in things that actually build social fabric and aren't inherently violent, which they are. So it's really about challenging yourself to see through, these things. See through these perceptions, and myths and lies of what the police are, and they've become quite fascist-like over the years, and effectively a standing army in a real way, and it becomes a dangerous time. And we are in a dangerous time. And this one wasn't meant to go through all the data, and a lot of this is repeated from before, but I can't really emphasize these things enough, and wanted to bring kind of this holistic picture of analysis of what this is, again, before kind of continuing on down this line around some of the really details and specifics in the depths of police reform, which I'll, again, be working on pulling together these things particularly after I get a little bit more settled in with this move. But police lie all the time too. And I want to leave on George Floyd, on his death certificate before the video was released. The police, or at least the police report, they made it sound passive in his death, like he didn't have a knee on his neck for minutes on end. There was like an accident that he died. And you see that in some of these deaths, where they'll say a certain thing. These deaths and these murders, a lot of these murders, the report will say something, and then there'll be video evidence that comes out that contradicts the report, that suggests, say, heart failure or asphyxiation in the process of arrest. Really weird, wording of aspects of things to try and say something completely different than what happened. And if they lied then, what makes you think that all of these other reports are actually truthful? It goes beyond individuals. But that's going to be it for this week. And aiming to really start digging in for next week, for y'all, around a bit more around police reform, really bringing in the numbers and the history behind these things. Because a lot of these same reform things that people say we need to do that are best practices have been said or been best practices, so-called best practices, for 30 or so years now, and a lot of departments have picked them up. And here we are. And there's better options. And I definitely want to get into more explaining of social alternatives to crime prevention, from a more left-wing, because left-wing perspective. And I think this is something that we fail at, further down on the left, is we might hand wave away a rise in crime, a rise in violent crime, such as right now. But we need to provide and fully speak alternative solutions to these things and push them out strongly and advocate for them strongly. And I think too many, and it's not that there aren't people doing that, but I think too many times we back away from the conversation of crime and violent crime and ways to address it. Because there are real ways to address these things that are humane, that don't continue to break our social fabric. But that is going to be it for this week at Find the Warmth of Our Sun. I'm Matthew Brown, your host here at Masson365. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. Hope you all have a great week. Enjoy the weather, and please, even if you're vaxxed, mask up. It's we got these variants out here. Have a good one, folks.
This is 365 Media.